Good morning, everyone. We now have quorum and we will begin. Thank you. A special thank you, personal thank you to the members who did appear today. I know it's a beautiful day outside and people might have other things to do, but we do have quorum. Thank you very much. Hopefully we can get through the agenda before lunchtime and we can still enjoy the day. So first we have the approval of the agenda that you see here in the package. It has the usual items, the usual placeholder items, most of which are empty, and then the only place we've got business is under statutory business. And there's a couple of reports from working groups. There are no briefings and no public meetings or anything like that. Does anyone want to move the agenda? Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Don. Any proposed changes to the agenda? Don.
I'd like to suggest an item under other business. I'd like to talk about, I guess, committee problems.
Committee problems. So like a state of affairs for the committee kind of thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, do I need consent of the committee? Okay, so we just moved by Dawn that we add an item under other business. Need a seconder, and then we'll just vote it in. Seconded by Peter. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. So that's under other business. We have an item now. Any other proposed changes? Okay, we'll approve the agenda as with that addition. All those in favor? And that carries. I'll just make a note of that. Minutes from June 7th. Need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Catherine, seconded by Councillor Schell. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we will vote on the minutes from June 7th. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. There are no presentations, no delegations, no briefings. Under business, there are A, B, C, D, E, F, 6 headings, and the first 3 are empty. Yes. Right. So the clerk has brought to my attention that because we're meeting, this is our regular time, but council's schedule has changed, and council is actually meeting next week, which is 6 days from now. We've missed the deadline for the agenda, so it needs to go on the, everything we do today has to go on the addendum for council on Tuesday or be delayed by another month. So we need a motion to include Heritage Kingston's recommendations on the next council's addendum. Moved by Dawn, seconded by Jamie. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Okay, so under business, like I was saying, ABC is empty. D, statutory business, always something there. We have we have 2 heritage permits, some designations, and some grants under statutory business. The first one, I believe, will be introduced by Mackenzie. Just to remind everyone, this is a Part 5 permit.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so this application pertains to the property at 250 Main Street in Berryfield. It's located on the east side of Main Street, south of the junction of Main and Highway 15 and north of Wellington. It contains a contemporary Georgian 2-story 5-bay side gable dwelling that was constructed in 2010. It's designated under Part 5 as part of the Heritage Conservation District, but it's a non-heritage building. This application has been submitted to request permission to undertake a number of landscaping modifications in the front yard, and including the construction of a raised front patio with a low sitting wall, featuring limestone-like precast concrete pavers, as well as a variety of soft landscaping features, including some planter beds and some new trees. The new owners of this property have indicated that the scale of this house is very imposing from the street and that it lacks the same heritage character that's found in the neighborhood. And the applicant has submitted this application to gain approval in hopes of improving the aesthetic from the public realm. So this property was originally constructed in 2010, and it had very minimal landscaping in the front yard, mostly in the areas close to the street and along the side. And this property is located at the top of a pretty steep sloping grade, which contributes to the imposing character of the house. So in order to address these issues, the owners wish to construct the concrete patio that's going to be set into the slope of the site. And the patio would be connected to one set of steps in the center and another set on the north side. The project also includes the installation of some soft landscaping elements, including the integration of some limestone pieces set into the slope of the property to create some stepped planting beds, as well as a walkway made from natural material, likely some crushed limestone, leading from the center of the patio to the driveway. The applicant has submitted an overview of the project, noting that the inspiration for the design of the gardens and planting materials was inspired by the heritage character of Berryfield and the Berryfield Rock Garden in particular. They've also done a bit of a streetscape analysis, noting some other elements that already exist in the district, such as some low-sitting walls and other limestone-like features. So this property is a non-heritage building in the district, and it sits on top of a small hill sloping down to Main Street. The main dwelling gives an imposing sense of scale that's out of character with the district, and the property currently has very little landscaping in the front yard. So any landscaping and vegetation undergoes change constantly, seasonally, and as it matures. However, it's often the most dynamic and memorable feature in a cultural landscape. So alterations to landscape can have a negative effect on the understanding and appreciation of the character of the district and surrounding heritage properties. Section 2 of the district plan specifically describes historic views along Main Street, the historic transportation route as framed by a range of built and natural features as an important contextual attribute of the district. The goals and objectives of Section 3 of the plan focus on conserving but also enhancing important views and landscape features. And although this application is to install new landscape elements, the proposal meets the intent of these goals and objectives as it relates to the enhancement of the cultural heritage value of the district through respectful and complementary development. And this proposal will have no negative impacts on the significant views down Main Street or any identified attributes of the district. Section 2 of the plan also describes the heritage value of the district, noting Berryfield is an evolving cultural landscape. And Section 4.7 encourages the evolution of landscape features, noting there's an important role for complementary addition of new features. Section 4.7.2, in relation to walls in particular, recommends that similar patterns found in the district should be used for guidance and inspiration. And as I mentioned, the applicant has submitted a streetscape study of similarly designed elements found in the district on which their landscaping plan has been based. And as such, this project meets the intent of Section 4.7 of the plan. In relation to non-heritage buildings, the plan notes it's important to retain a green setting for buildings and lawns, landscaped areas, and walkways. It recommends replanting of the same species in the district in order to ensure landscape components will continue to contribute to the value of the district over time. Section 4.7.1 notes that soft landscaping should be maximized, provided it doesn't obstruct the views of the buildings from the street. It also recommends that paved areas be limited in front of the building and recommends that plant materials be used that are already found in the district, and the applicant has proposed to use plant materials like lilies, irises, lilacs, as recommended in Appendix D of the plan. At this point, the owners are unclear as to how much grass will be retained, but they have indicated that they wish to reduce the amount of lawn. And staff have recommended that some areas be retained in order to maintain the green space and ensure continuity in the streetscape. And staff have included a condition as part of the recommendation in order to ensure that plant types and their locations are appropriate. And given the imposing character of this dwelling, in this case, staff are of the opinion that the plantings in front of the house would actually minimize the unsympathetic appearance of the property in the streetscape. The HCD plan also recommends concrete, flagstone, or pavers as suitable materials for landscaping, as long as they don't overwhelm or visually compete with the cohesive appearance. And the applicant has chosen precast concrete paver stones, which will have a similar color to limestone, which is a material typically found in the district. So staff have no concerns with this proposal or the proposed materials, as they will meet the material guidelines found in the plan. The low sitting wall will be slightly raised, and however, staff are confident that when the property is backfilled and materials are introduced, the plant materials are introduced rather, the wall will blend visually with the property, as it will be mostly obscured. So although this application relates to an infill building in the district, it's good practice to uphold widely accepted conservation approaches, and as such, Parks Canada's standards and guidelines does recommend introducing vegetation to ensure the value of places preserved by planting, using plantings as a screen of new construction. So this application was circulated internally to various departments who provided a number of comments that we've included as recommendations where appropriate. Mainly, the comments pertain to just reminding the applicant that the property line actually extends quite far up the slope of the property. And so they're just reminded that any planting or the structures should be within the property limits, and the plantings should, they may have to be removed at some point if the road needs to be widened. This application was circulated to Heritage Kingston, and staff received a couple of comments, mainly that the property does currently lack sympathetic landscaping, and expressed the proposal appeared to enhance the building's contribution to the streetscape. Another member noted that the paver stones should be large in size and similar in color to limestone, and this suggestion was forwarded to the applicant, and they have confirmed that that is the intent of the design. So the district plan highlights that several new residences have been built in the district as sympathetic infill, and this property is one of those. And they are sympathetic in material and style, however, out of character in massing and scale. And staff are of the opinion that this project will improve the appearance of the property as seen from the public realm. And so upon review of the submitted materials, staff are satisfied that the proposal meets the intent of the district plan and best practices in conservation, and have no objections to the proposed scope of work, subject to the conditions outlined in this report.
Thank you, Mackenzie. So the clerk has reminded me of the procedure, the approved procedure for Part 5. After the introduction, members are asked if their comments that they made in dash are captured accurately in the report. So that's the stage we go first. And then it's members of the public, including the applicant or the applicant's agent, get to speak. And then we as committee members get a chance to comment and or ask questions of staff, and then we vote. That's what's in order for an application of this nature. So first of all, anyone that made comments in dash if your comments were not captured accurately, you have a chance to correct them now. Seeing none, now we'll go to members of the public, including the applicant or the applicant's agent. Would anyone like to speak? Please come forward, turn on a microphone, state your name.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Frank Dixon, Williamsville resident. Thank you for the presentation. Very well done, and very good report as well. I'm in favor of the project. It looks really good. Just a couple of small questions. Looking at the illustration on page 33, top half, it was one of the slides on the show as well, just showing the finished outcome as envisioned at this point. I'm just talking about the tree that's on the left-hand side. Question number one, thinking about the species that's planned for that, and then number two, is it to be transplanted in at that size, or is it to grow in over a period of the next, say, 15, 20 years? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the public? Seeing none, staff has an opportunity to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This image is just a concept image. The applicant provided just to give an idea of what they were proposing, but they will be using species that are recommended in the Appendix D of the plan. The applicant is here. I'm not sure if she wants to speak to the tree. Sure.
So,
I can speak into it.
yes, go ahead and respond on behalf of staff
Okay.
to the question.
Yeah, I'm the landscaper involved in this, and my rendering program is more for the hardscape. So if you notice, I didn't really get the slope on that. Yeah, this is just a concept, so it would be one of the ones off of the list there, and if I remember correctly, I believe it was in the ornamental pear family. And yeah, it wouldn't be that big and imposing. It's at a scale, but unfortunately, like I said, the program only does the hardscape very nicely. The plants are basically non-generic type things.
Thank you. Essentially, the computer rendering can be quite inaccurate and suggestive in ways that it wasn't meant to be. Thank you. So now we're at the point where committee members get to add any comments or ask questions. Your comments will be captured in the minutes and included in the report to council. Jamie.
I just want to say I think this is a great way forward for this property. I've always thought in terms of a new build in Berryfield, it's one of the more problematic buildings that have gone in. And I think this landscaping and the justification behind it and the proposed plans are a great way to remedy the unsympathetic features and to blend it in. I think it's going to improve the property and the whole village a lot.
Thank you. Did you get that, James? Okay, James has that. Catherine, you're next.
I go along with Jamie. I think it's a great idea to put all of the, to make the landscape more sympathetic. I just have a question, and that is to do with whether the work has already begun or not. It looks from page 31 that we have construction of.
Does staff have an answer for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, actually the work has already started. The construction was brought to staff's attention after the work had already begun, and because the owner is a new owner, they weren't really fully aware of the process, so we were able to work with the applicant to go through the permit process for this.
Thank you. And then just a comment, and that is to do with the green space. I think that it would be wonderful to have plantings and so on in there, but I do think it's really important to maintain the green space. So just to, as a recommendation, to make sure that there is plenty of grass that remains.
Any other comments? Yes, Don?
I guess it's a bit unusual that this committee deals with landscaping questions, but I'm happy to make some comments. Certainly agree that shrubbery and trees would help the appearance of this rather stark building, and so that should go ahead. I hope the landscaping tries to be consistent with Berryfield sort of style, which I would say tends to be rather informal rather than formal, and includes lots of green grass rather than mulched areas, open gravel mulched areas. And the other point is I guess there's some concern about the visibility of the stone patio, so I'd certainly recommend evergreen shrubbery in front of that wall to help break that up and shield that. So that's, thanks.
Thank you. I also have a comment, James. So I think, like most members have spoken, we're in favor of the concept. The concept is a really good one. There are a few things to just keep in mind, seeing as the owners are new to the area and may not fully understand the Berryfield plan and what's in it. In addition to what's already been said, if there are any trees being planted on a slope like that, I assume as the landscaper is aware that the runoff issues make it more difficult for the tree to be viable in the long term. So to really consider the species also be chosen for its durability on a slope and in an exposed setting like this. Because I've seen many trees planted on slopes that don't thrive or just die because of these considerations not being taken into account. And I'm sure as a landscaper you understand what I'm talking about. Other than that, I think it's great that this is happening, and has been pointed out, the infill property itself is not a great addition perhaps to the Berryfield landscape, but these improvements take us closer to that reality. So thank you. Now we vote on the permit application, the recommendation here, which I will just read. So that Heritage Kingston supports Council's approval of the following: that alterations to the property at 250 Main Street be approved in accordance to the details described in the application, which was deemed complete on June 15th, with said alterations to include a number of landscaping modifications within the front yard, including a front patio and planting beds, subject to the following conditions. There are 5 conditions. You can see them in the package. That is the recommendation, and it is, of course, Council's final decision. This is our recommendation to Council. All those or need a mover and a seconder, sorry. Moved by Catherine, seconded by Liz. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Good luck. Next, we have another heritage permit application. This one for 28 Wellington Street in Sydenham. Let staff get set up here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. This application relates to the property at 28 Wellington Street. It's located on the northwest side of Wellington between Gore and Lower Union Street, and it contains one half of a 2.5-story symmetrical red brick house with a bell-curved mansard roof and a 2-story front porch. The building was constructed in 1878, designated under Part 5 as part of the Old Sydenham Conservation District. And this application has been submitted to request permission to reconstruct the recently removed 2-story front porch. The newly constructed porch will be of similar style to the abutting porch at 26 Wellington Street. The porch at 26 Wellington recently received Heritage Act approval to include the removal of the 2nd-story roof in place of an open-air balcony. The porch on the subject property was deemed to be structurally unsound by an engineer and was accordingly removed by way of an emergency approval. Original photos of the entrance porch have been included as Exhibit A. This was the original porch. The owner has submitted drawings and concept sketches as well as paint samples, which are included in the report as well. And the applicant has preserved and refurbished the upper story columns for reuse on the ground floor and will reinstate the railings following their repair. Although both the upper and lower columns were originally salvaged, it was found that only one set could be repaired, and thus the applicant has proposed to install simple square section posts at the second story instead. New wood decking is proposed on the upper floor balcony, while the ground floor will be repainted and repaired with new wood where necessary. The faux stone bases of the columns which support the porch will be restored to a natural gray to match the design of the neighboring porch. And the applicant has chosen a paint scheme of mainly black with some gray accents to match the remaining black trim and architectural details currently on the building. This property is included in the district plan, the Old Sydenham District Plan, and the property evaluation notes it as a significant property in the district. It was designed by Joseph Power, one of Kingston's prominent local architects. And the evaluation identifies the pair of porches as character-defining elements. And the evaluation also notes that the building is bold in appearance, a feature emphasized by its flat facade, high foundation, and symmetrical features. Following a site visit and review of staff records, it was found that a number of these features are not original or well constructed, and particularly the stone bases, which appear to be concrete or faux stone, as well as the connections between the original porch and the main house. So the applicant has submitted this application to request permission to reconstruct the front porch to match that of the neighboring property. This property is located in the North Tobago sub-area, and the plan provides that the view of City Park from Wellington and the reflected vistas along Wellington is an important contextual attribute of this sub-area. This proposal will not impact the views to the park or the vistas, and is accordingly consistent with the objectives of the district plan. As per section 2.6.2 of the district plan, removal or replacement of character-defining elements is discouraged within a designated property unless absolutely necessary. Section 434 of the plan provides policies that specifically relate to porches and verandas and notes that original versions should be retained. And further, this section notes that in cases where removal cannot be avoided, original porch details should be replaced with new wood components that are appropriately treated for exposure to the exterior elements. The applicant, a relatively new owner to this building, undertook a thorough investigation of the condition of the porch, including seeking an assessment by a structural engineer prior to contacting planning staff. And the engineer's assessment demonstrated that the porch was no longer safe, and the applicant went through the required permit process to have it removed quickly and carefully, ensuring that as much original material as much original material as possible was preserved and repaired in order to incorporate it into the reconstruction. And in these ways, the proposal met the intent of the policies and objectives of the district plan. Now, having removed the porch, the applicant is requesting permission to reconstruct the porch in a slightly modified design for the second-story balcony, which incorporates many of the original salvaged materials. The applicant is currently proposing to reinstate the original upper columns on the ground floor and install new wood columns within the second story of the porch. And the conservation and incorporation of these original columns and wood elements for the upper balcony using like-for-like materials meets the design policies of Section 434 of the plan. Additionally, the Heritage Conservation District Plan notes that porches should be restored only after finding documentary evidence of the original appearance, and 521 recommends that alterations be based on an assessment that differentiates original construction from subsequent additions. So staff and the applicant have no archival images of the front porch that can be referenced for clues as to the original design. However, it's evident from the location of the roof of the porch over the second-story balcony that it was likely not original, as once the porch had been removed, the intricate bracket and soffit details beneath the roof were revealed. And staff are of the opinion that the applicant's proposal to rebuild the porch without that second-story roof would reinstate the previously hidden brackets and cornice features, which meets the intent of the district plan. As such, staff support the proposed reconstruction without the pedimented roof. The applicant has chosen to use a black paint scheme with accents of lighter shades of gray to enhance the detailed features of the porch. Section 2 of the plan notes that within the district there's a visual sense of coherence, and this can be attributed to elements such as color. The district plan is varied, but it can be described as visually unified by color, and the proposal will not detract from that visual coherence of the area, and its design, massing, and choice of color is consistent with that which is found in the district. Section 433 in the plan, in relation to decorative trim and wood details, recommends that the applicants choose paint colors that are compatible with the district and the district's character, that are complementary to the age, style, and detailing of the building. It also defines compatibility as capable of existing in harmony and without adverse impact on existing or proposed development, and further notes that it should be based on elements such as aesthetics, and recommends to looking to other properties for examples. And staff were unable to find examples of black porches. However, there are examples of dark brown and dark gray porches, as well as many black detailed features such as trim throughout the district. So given that the property already has black details and trim, staff are of the opinion that having the porch match will be in keeping with the character of the property. The proposal is also considered compatible in design and the use of color with the abutting property being the other half of the double house. This abutting unit has a white color scheme, and the use of black within the subject property will provide contrast between the two, supporting the bold appearance, the characteristics described in the property evaluation. The applicant also intends to refurbish the stone column bases to achieve a natural-looking state by either restoring the veneer or repainting in a natural gray color. The plan generally discourages painting masonry. However, given that these bases are likely not original and currently painted brown, staff are of the opinion that either of these approaches are appropriate. The proposal also involves reinstating the refurbished wood columns on top of a flat aluminum base, which would sit on top of the existing faux columns, in order to ensure long-term stabilization of the columns above. Given that the proposed bases beneath the refurbished wood columns will provide necessary structural stability, and the material will be unnoticeable once painted, staff are satisfied this meets the intent of the policies in the plan. So this application was circulated internally to the various departments, and staff have incorporated their comments as conditions of approval where appropriate. And this application was also circulated to Heritage Kingston, and staff received a couple of comments that noted no major concerns with the project, and that the reconstructed porch would help to match with the property next door. One member asked for some clarifications on the soffits and brackets and whether they would be repaired, and the applicant has confirmed that he intends to repair those features using like-for-like materials and colors. Another member suggested that the applicant consider using rounded tops or balls for the posts on the upper deck, noting that they probably weren't originally flat. He noted that while the neighbors' posts are flat, there was an intention to rebuild the second-story roof. However, that's unlikely to happen now. And staff have forwarded this suggestion to the applicant. However, given the symmetry of this building as a character attribute, staff support the flat tops as proposed. There was also concern expressed regarding the paint color scheme, with one member noting that the black and gray colors are very gloomy colors. And staff have forwarded this comment to the applicant and have encouraged them to look to other red brick houses for other potential color schemes. However, this property is located in an area that receives a lot of natural light for most of the day, and so the dark colors will likely not have the same impact as they would if the property were located mostly in the shade. And ultimately, staff are of the opinion that that color is reversible, which meets Parks Canada's standards and guidelines, standard 12. So staff support the reconstruction of the porch as proposed, as the project demonstrates best practices in heritage conservation and meets the overall goals and objectives of the Conservation District Plan. And upon review of the submitted materials, staff recommend approval of the submitted application, subject to the conditions outlined in this report.
Thank you, Mackenzie. So, same procedure as last item. First, we ask members if there are comments to the two members that made comments in dash. If they were not captured accurately, here's your chance to correct that. Seeing nothing, we go to members of the public, including applicant or applicant's agent. Oh yeah, please. Turn on a... sorry, you have to turn on the microphone. It's
Okay.
procedural rule, sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Paul Sutherland. I'm the owner of 28 Wellington Street with my wife, and we live there with our 4 children and have done for the last 4 years. So, first of all, thank you, Mackenzie, for summarising the history of this application and the design involved. Can I ask you, Mackenzie, would you be kind enough, please, to return the slide of the neighbouring porch at 26 Wellington Street? Because I really just wanted to highlight 3 or 4 aspects of the application, and the first is about the striking similarities of the design and process that we're going through to that which was undertaken at 26. Because one point that I'm not sure was highlighted was this: the 26 Wellington Street porch, as you see it there and now, was constructed last year, and until then they had the same full 2-story porch, so double height porch that goes right up to the parapet in the same way that ours did until it was taken down last month. And after extensive consultation and research, they decided to modify the design to this shorter single story with a balcony design. And it was highlighted at the time, and I think it's an important aspect of that choice of design, that it's very clear from the existence of the parapet detailing on both houses that when originally constructed, these houses probably had the shorter version of the porch, and that the full 2-story porch is a later change. Now, when we were faced with the same decision a month or 2 ago, we ultimately decided to adopt a design which is very, very similar, if not identical, to that which you see there at 26 Wellington Street, the shorter version, reusing the upper columns, they're the longer columns that were in our old structure, for the columns in the lower part of that structure, which is exactly what the neighbours did, because they, like us, had 16 columns and found that only the 8 upper columns were restorable. They also found that the only way to reuse them and provide some longevity for the columns and the structure was to obtain bespoke aluminum bases for the columns. And we've gone to the same supplier and are using exactly the same aluminum bases. they chose to restore as best they could what's been described as the faux stone concrete columns. And our concrete columns underneath the paint appear to be exactly the same, and we propose to do exactly the same as they've done to those concrete bases. So in terms of the choice of materials, I think that covers everything, except that they've reused all of their old handrails, and we're doing the same so far as we're able to. There are a couple of lengths that need to be rebuilt, and they will be rebuilt to exactly the same profile as the old ones. So we're very much hoping that the harmony that will be provided with an almost identical porch to the one on the mirror image property, that will be appealing and acceptable to members of the committee. Now, the other aspect I wanted to mention, to address, is the choice of colours, because that's been commented upon at least once. So I really wanted to highlight 3 points on that. The first is to emphasise the care that we've taken in choosing that colour scheme. I'm lucky in that my wife, who lives with me, Jen Story of Jen Story Designs, is a local designer and has been a designer in Kingston for over 10 years. She's worked on a number of heritage projects, including exteriors, and perhaps you'll remember the development on Princess Street between Bagot and Wellington, in which a large 3-storey building was restored to its original exposed limestone. It's the Rogers Communications building and the surrounding building now. She was a designer for that project. And Jen spoke with Mackenzie, a number of neighbours, and ultimately decided that the right colour scheme, and her preferred colour scheme and mine, is a black and grey scheme. And there are really 2 principal reasons for that. One is, as you'll see from the photo, virtually all of our trim at 28 Wellington Street is black. And it has been so for decades, because I've personally had to work on some of the paintwork around those windows and dormers, and there is layer after layer of black paint. So that's an established colour feature of the property, and we consider that having a principally black with accents of grey scheme will complement and be harmonious with that existing scheme. And the other aspect of the colour choice that I wanted to address was the point about historical accuracy. Now, the restoration workshop that's in the course of working on the columns at the moment has stripped them as far as possible down to the original wood. And in the course of that, they have told me that they found about 16 different colours of paint on the columns. The first 6 or so appear to have been various shades of red, from bright red to dark red. And then the following 6 were different shades of yellow, light yellow, mid-yellow, and so on. And then in recent years, it appears to have been largely orange. Now, we didn't consider that any of those choices of colours would be appropriate, and we considered that black would be the most appropriate for the property. And I think that just highlighting the number of colours that it's been is a good illustration of how, in our view, it's the variety of colours that one sees in Sydenham Ward that forms part of its tremendous appeal and charm. Because there is a huge variety of colours just walking up and down Wellington Street. Very many of the properties have the predominant colour of black, but there are so many different shades of dark grey, dark brown and black that we consider that's an important feature, and that's why we feel that it's not inappropriate at all to have a black and grey scheme on this property. Ultimately, I'd remind you that of course it's a subjective matter, and remind you that we've taken a lot of care in choosing that, and it's also something that's relatively transient. The thought and care that we've taken in the design are obviously important, because they're going to be there for a long time, I very much hope, another 50 or 100 years at least. But the colour, if someone comes in after me in a few years' time and doesn't like it, it may change, subject to this committee's approval, of course. That's all I wanted to say, unless anyone wants to ask me any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sutherland. Yes, and just turn off your microphone. We'll call you back. Just turn off the microphone. We'll call you back if there are any questions, but the procedure allows for each member or member of the public to speak once up to 5 minutes. So the members of the committee now have a chance to make final comments to include in the report to council. Catherine.
Thank you. I think it's a great improvement on what
Move
you
your-
had
yeah, thank you.
before. The one-story porch, and it's clear that it was a one-story porch in days gone by. As far as the colours are concerned, I have a question about that, because you have here Kendall grey, Revere pewter and black, and I can't see on the drawing where the Kendall grey is.
Yeah, I think that ultimately there isn't going to be any Kendall grey unless we find that the caps of the original flow columns need painting, because that's the closest match to the actual stone colour of the lower part. So to answer your question, it's likely to just be black and Revere pewter, which is the lighter
Yeah.
shade grey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just, sorry, it's just the, if you don't, not speaking to a microphone, it can't be captured in the minutes. Also, the questions that are in order are questions to staff, and also regarding what's in the district plan regarding color scheme. Anything further than that, you can have a conversation with the applicant after the meeting, but it isn't what would go in the report to council.
It was just a clarification.
Right.
Thank you.
So if members have questions of clarification, it's staff that needs to answer because they've got all of the information. Anyone else? Yes, Don.
Well, I certainly echo Catherine in commending the applicant for the care in which they're undertaking this project, and I know it's a very substantial one. Just a few comments. In the DASH report, I said something about the pillars on the columns on the upper story probably shouldn't be left flat, but I think just to repeat, they were left there and flat on the other property because there was a hope that someday the upper story would be restored. But I don't think there's any need to feel that it should be restored. I think it's clear that the upper story was not original, and probably there was just a one-story porch to begin with. So I think that's really a dead issue, and it's also an advantage in the sense that it reveals the brackets and the cornice at the roof line as well. So that being said, it also seems sensible to consider, instead of having those 3 posts on the upper story, to just have 1 corner post, because the 3 posts are really a kind of statement of that this is really part of a second story, and that's no longer the case. So you could consider just having 1 post on the upper level. So that's one point. And as I said, probably flat top is not the best design. It could be sort of pointed or pyramidal or a ball-shaped or sphere-shape on top of it. I guess I was a little surprised by the use of the aluminum plate or plinth, I guess you might call it. I'm not familiar with that, haven't come across that before. Personally, I'm not convinced that it will do any good. The problem with deterioration of these columns is that moisture works its way into the base and whether, well, setting the pillar on an aluminum plate doesn't prevent water from working its way into the base of the column. So it means that the base itself will not deteriorate, so that's a step forward, I suppose. But what is really important is that these elements be protected as far as possible. All the wooden surfaces should be painted on all surfaces before they're assembled. And personally, I would suggest caulking very carefully the under level of the pillar so water will not penetrate. But other people have probably different recipes, but and you know, I'm not suggesting that I know all the answers on this, but that's just something to think about. Finally, about colors, yeah, I have reservations about black or very dark colors as well. I think it's unfortunate that 26 Wellington, the porch was painted such a glaring white. I'm sure this committee did not approve that, but that's what's there now, and I'm not sure what the best solution is. You've obviously thought carefully about these colors, so all I can say is use your best judgment if you're going forward, and I hope it works out all right.
Thank you. Any other members wish to have final comments captured? Okay, I do have a short comment. The thing that was striking to me about what the applicant was saying, Mr. Sutherland, is that the existing rebuilt porch of his neighbor, he's inextricably linked to that design because the building is a mirror image, and because of other than paint details and small other details, if symmetry is one of the considerations, then his hands are kind of tied about what he can do on his side, including the flat tops of the second story truncated columns, and including using the same sort of design of those that new balcony columns. Like he's kind of inextricably tied, if he wants symmetry, to what has already been done at 26. And my conclusion from that is that we know that this white color of paint on 26 is not a heritage approved. It was not approved through heritage considerations. And we know that at the time they were saying they were going to put a second story on the porch, which has never happened. There's a few sort of irregularities on that first porch, and now it's being doubled with this applicant being forced to match. I just want to point out that there's a domino effect when things come through staff and end up however that they end up, and that other applicants then have to follow suit. And that is why the district plan needs to be as strictly enforced as possible at every opportunity, because this kind of thing can warp over time and become worse and worse. That being said, I think this particular application is very sensible, and I plan to support its going to council. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments? Okay, then I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Dawn, seconded by Catherine. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries unanimously. So that will go to council on the addendum next Tuesday. Okay, so the next item is some designations. And staff will be introducing this. I've already spoken a little bit to staff in the agenda meeting that we had, so we'll hear about the introduction, and then you'll notice that there are many clauses, each one pertaining to a specific address, and you'll see a repetition of the language through the recommendations, very long recommendation. Go ahead, Mr. Lear, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure what happened to my first slide, so I will just skip it. Yes, this is an application for consultation on notice of intention to designate 7 properties that are here before you. The report gives you information on the background and reasons for designation for these properties. So a lot of these have originated from various consulting reports over the years. The Cultural Heritage property evaluation that was done a couple years ago, the Williamsville designation project in 2013, and work from Jennifer McKendry in Cataraqui Village in 2011, and have culminated into the advancement of designations for these various properties. Each of the applications, or each of these properties, were evaluated under the Ontario Regulation 906, which is the criteria for designation in the Heritage Act. And the physical design, historical, associative, and contextual values of these properties were evaluated and reviewed by both the consultant, staff, and the Heritage Properties Working Group. So to start with, each of these draft designation bylaws and the notice of intent are in your agenda package. So I'll just quickly go through the high points. I won't go into great detail on each one. The first one here is the Bell Telephone Building in Williamsville at 450 Princess Street. It was built in 1941 to accommodate the transition from operator-assisted telephone system to a dial operations, and it's also the home of the Kingston office of the Bell Canada Company. It's a modern classical style for commercial buildings in the 1930s and 40s. It also includes 2 bas-relief sculptures that flank the front entrance. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there, as well as a mural that's inside the main lobby, inside the front door, which will also appear on the screen. That was done by Canadian artist Adam Sheriff Scott. The building is also the work of well-known architects Frederick McNabb and Hugh Valentine, who designed a number of these buildings for Bell Canada. And this unique modern classical architecture in the Kingston area is a landmark in Williamsville. The second building you might know as the Mansion. It's the George Newland House at 506 Princess Street. This one was built in 1874. It's a 2.5-story Italianate style brick building. It was built for local contractor George Newland in association with his architect John Power. Now, Newlands and Power have tag teamed on a number of buildings in Kingston, most notably the work on the Frontenac County Courthouse. This building reflects the history of residential development along Princess Street in Williamsville, which is largely lost. So these are sort of the few remnant houses along that stretch from the 1800s. Next door, or 2 doors over from that house, is the Birmingham Hardy House at 520 Princess Street, also Williamsville. It was built a few decades after the previous one in 1892. This one was built for the Honorable William Hardy, who was a prominent businessman and politician in Kingston. His partner and brother-in-law, Cornelius Birmingham, operated the Canadian Locomotive and Engine Company, which was a prominent company in the late 19th and early 20th century. And again, it's one of the last residences along Princess Street from that era. From an earlier era is this building at the corner, I believe it's Nelson and Princess. This is Carter's Grocery at 635 Princess Street. It was built in 1873 for Kingston Penitentiary guard Thomas Carter and his wife Marjorie, his wife ran the grocery out of this building until 1913. And its stone construction and its prominence on Princess Street makes it a landmark as well. Changing gears, this is out on the west end of the city at 3737 Princess. This is known as Red Rock School. Red Rock was an early name for the village of Westbrook. And this limestone schoolhouse was built around 1850 and was built to serve as both a church and a school, and did that for about a decade before the Methodist Church was built in Westbrook. And then this is another schoolhouse. This one is in Cataraqui Village, the former Cataraqui Village. It's at 911 Purdy's Mill Road, and it's known as Cattaraugus Public School, former Cattaraugus Public School. It was built in around 1869, and it was designed by John Power. There was an addition added about a decade after it was built, also by Power, designs by Power. This was became the first two-room schoolhouse in Kingston Township when that addition was built, and it's a landmark in this village, and also helps as a reminder of the former village in this area. And finally, this is the Jess Purdy House in Elginburg on 2268 Sydenham Road. It is an early, built before 1851. It's a 19th century Ontario vernacular frame house. There aren't too many frame houses on this city's register, so this is sort of a treat. Jesse Purdy was a Wesleyan Methodist farmer and loyalist who built the house. He sold it to Simon Jackson a few years later, who his family, the Jackson family, owned most of Elginburg at one point. And this building is right on Sydenham Road and is a prominent landmark in that area. So as I mentioned, the Heritage Property Working Group have reviewed these draft bylaws and are supportive. While property owners are not required to support designations of their properties, each of these owners were provided a letter with the draft bylaw and the background report. We've also followed up where no response was received. Staff also followed up with emails, phone calls, and in some cases attended the site in person. Given that these properties meet the provincially mandated criteria for heritage resources, and in an effort to advance the conservation of these assets, staff are recommending that we proceed with the serving of the notice of intention to designate.
Thank you, Ryan. You'll notice if you count up the clauses in the recommendation, there are exactly 14, two clauses for each of the 7 properties. So now, under the procedure, we go to members of the committee. If you have any questions only. Yes, Peter.
Thank you. Perhaps if I were more familiar with some of the details, I would be able to answer this question myself. But for, 506 Princess Street, the Newlands house has been pretty effectively deformed by additions and whatnot. When this designation becomes official, does it protect in any way those additions to the place which are not mentioned, which have nothing to do with the original design of the Newlands house?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to direct the committee's attention to page 80 and 81 of your agenda package is the draft designating bylaw for this particular property. Of interest is the cultural heritage attributes at the bottom of that page and the start of the next page. So those are the, for lack of a better term, the things of this building that give it its heritage value. Items that aren't included on that list, typically modern additions, modern changes to it, don't add to the value of the property, Mr. Chair. And it doesn't mean that changes to those will not come to this committee. They might, depending on the extent of them. So that is an opportunity to have input on how those changes evolve. But they're not what gives the property its value. So it's not something that we'd be looking at protecting in any particular way.
Thank you, Ryan. Or put it a different way, once the property is designated, the whole property is designated, may trigger a heritage permit application if significant changes are proposed. And then the cultural attributes that are listed in the designation are used by staff and this committee to evaluate the proposed changes.
Can I seek just a clarification then? Pardon me. There is nothing to suggest in the page 8081 that by designating features which are characteristic of the original building, that if someone wanted to restore it and rip down some of the stuff that's been added, that it would be more difficult to do that because that is to get rid of some of the more recent and unsympathetic accretions.
I can maybe add to that, Mr. Chair. Those type of alterations would certainly be subject to Heritage Act approval, and we would look at those as how well they meet national and local best practice as far as conservation. So it is something that we'd all get a hand in looking at and considering their impacts on the heritage value of this building. So yeah, I wouldn't say it would make it difficult. If it's not a heritage attribute, then certainly it's something that isn't adding to the value of the building. So it could be removed, I suppose.
Yes, and also just remind the committee that we did see an application like this on Sydenham Street recently, where there was a non-heritage attribute that was being modified. So it is an important distinction. Thank you. Questions? Okay, so we'll go to members of the public. Comments or questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Mr. Weary for the report and the presentation. I have the same question for 2 of the 7 items that are on there, and I'm just going to sort of put it out there. Looking at the Bell Building at 450 Princess, it ends, despite your best efforts, you can't get a hold of the owner, right? I mean, does Bell still own the building? I'm really curious about that. I mean, it is currently used, right? It's still in operation. I'm really curious as to how it came to be that staff weren't able to contact the owner. And then I'll go on the same question with the 520 Princess Street, which is, I mean, there's a business operating there, right? It's a hairstylist place. I walk by there, probably 4 or 5 times a week. And it's busy, it's currently operating, and I'm just curious as to how it came to be that staff couldn't get a hold of the owner to discuss it.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Staff has an opportunity to respond to the questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So registered mail was sent to the registered owner of each of these properties. It's our understanding that Bell Canada does still own that building. We assume they've received it. It didn't come back to us. We have a number of contacts at Bell, which we've reached out to with varying success. As far as Maison Paul, the building, the Birmingham Hardy House, same thing. We've sent the owner registered mail, and we have spoken to that owner on a couple of occasions and left messages on others. So we have reached out to these owners to the best of our ability.
Thank you. Okay, so then we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation so we can get it on the floor. Moved by Jamie, seconded by Peter. So, as I've said, there's 14 clauses, all repetitively listing the 30-day notice of from the publication, and that's 30 days. I clarified this. It's 30 days from the time it's publicly available. So there is a 30-day period for each one, and then there's the notice of intention to designate clause for each one. And you'll see the section 29 mentioned in each of these clauses as well. Any debate? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Did I not? I got one. It's moved by Jamie and seconded by Peter. Yeah. It's a good thing someone's paying attention. Okay, that passes. Thank you very much. Next item. Grant applications. You'll see the recommendation in the package, 4 clauses. Go ahead, Mackenzie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This report is for Heritage Property Grant applications for 4 properties, which are tied to heritage permits that staff have reviewed under delegated authority. Several of the properties are designated under Part 5 and others designated under Part 4. The quotes for the proposed work have been included, as well as property photographs as part of this report. The first application is for 194 King Street East. It's located on the northwest side of King Street at the intersection of Gore. This property is designated under Part 4 and also is included in the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District. This application is tied to work the applicant is proposing to repair and repaint portions of the street-facing dormers and the columns of the front wood portico. The applicant has submitted a quote approximately $7,400, and they are eligible for $2,000. The next is 658 King Street West. It's located on the south side of King Street. It's designated under Part 4. The applicant is proposing to repoint and repair the west wall of this building in accordance with the city's masonry policy. They've submitted a quote for $4,000, and they are eligible for $2,000 in grant funding. 104 Bagot Street is located on the northwest side of Bagot Street and is designated under Part 5 as part of the Old Sydenham District. The applicant is proposing to replace 2 windows with new aluminum-clad wood windows, as well as replace a non-original door with a new wood window. And this will all be in accordance with the city's policy on window renovations. The applicant has submitted a quote for $10,000 and is eligible for $2,000 in funding. And finally, 191 King Street East, located on the southeast side of King Street. It's designated under Part 4. It's also located in the Old Sydenham District. And this property is also subject to a heritage conservation easement with the Ontario Heritage Trust. And the applicant is proposing to repair and repaint the existing shutters, as well as repaint the wood elements on the main building, as well as the carriage house in accordance with the easement terms and the district plan, and with approval from the trust. In this application, the applicant is eligible for $2,000 in grant funding for this as well. To qualify for eligible work, the proposed alterations must conserve or enhance the existing heritage attributes of the property. The alterations proposed on these various properties include repainting, repointing, repair of existing windows, as well as the repair of existing features. The reconstruction of existing features that are beyond repair or conservation, reproduction of significant features, and the repair or restoration of exteriors of buildings are noted specifically in the Heritage Grant Bylaw as eligible work. The proposed alterations will help address current deterioration concerns, minimize future deterioration, and improve the lifespan of various key features on these protected heritage properties. The replacement of the non-original door proposed for 104 Bagot Street will reinstate the original sized window, the window opening, to match the other units of the row. And as such, this work will be in accordance with the city's window policy in heritage buildings. So staff will recommend approval of these grant applications. The properties were circulated to financial services to ensure there's no unpaid taxes or local improvement charges or other monies owing to the city, and they have confirmed that all of these properties are eligible for grant funding. The city has currently 11 grant applications have been preliminarily approved under the grant program, and if these 4 grant applications are approved, the associated works validated, and the remaining balance of funds will be approximately $6,000. And staff have received 3 applications for grants that will be coming to this committee in August, and that will be the remainder of the funds for the program for this year. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to repeat what Mackenzie just said, this is relevant to our decision because we run out of grant funding money sometimes, and that's the case this year. If these 4 are approved, that's 8,000 out of the 14,000 and change that's remaining. 3 applications already on the books that would take up the remaining 6,000, and then that would be it. Our question really is, do we approve every grant application that's recommended by staff, or do we start to look at ways to triage the applications in hopes that the ones that come later in the year might be more worthy? But other than that, there isn't a lot to consider because we're either supporting the grant application or not, right? That's the question in front of us. So, questions from members of the committee? Catherine.
I'm just wondering whether there is any information on past years, how many grant applications were made, so that we can kind of see whether, in fact, we need to look at, sort of putting them in some kind of order. If not, then, all the ones that I have seen have been absolutely reasonable, so it would be difficult to kind of say no to them.
That's correct, and also if we continue in the pattern that we've done so far this year, what we're doing is we're saying first come, first serve until the money runs out, as long as it's eligible. That's the current approach that we have. Jamie?
In terms of criteria for the applicants, do we differentiate between private homeowners versus a for-profit company like the Frontenac property? Their office happens to be in a heritage building. Is there any other consideration in terms of income levels of the private owners, or is it literally just first come, first serve?
Who wants to answer that? Director Agnew, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. So in the time that I've been here in the last 3 years, there's certainly been an increase in the amount of money that we've put toward the grant program. Originally, it was about $24,000 a year, and we were certainly allocating $24,000 of grants per year. We're now doing about $36,000. And historically, it has been done on a first-come, first-served basis. So things like people's income levels, whether it's a private company or an individual, those aren't criteria that we're utilizing now based on the way the program was established.
I think I saw another hand. Who else had a question? Peter, did you have a question? No? Okay. So that's questions. Any other questions? Oh, Catherine.
Just one question about paint color. So if we're approving grant money for painting as being one of the elements of that, are we to assume that the paint color is not going to be changed?
I think that has more to do with the permit that's already been granted, but go ahead, Mr. Leary.
Can I just clarify, Mr. Chair, which application we're referring to? Because I think painting was a number of them.
Well, I can use Cartwright House as, say, an example.
I can maybe answer that, Mr. Chair. That was a permit that I reviewed. The Cartwright House just received new owners over the last year or so, and they've been looking at ways of sprucing the place up and restoring it. So they've done a lot of work on the interior, but what interests us in the exterior was the repairs to the porch or to the shutters and the wooden soffit fascia on that building. It's my recollection that the dark green shutters, they are actually choosing a sort of dark blue shade, so similar, but a blue shade as opposed to a green shade. And the soffits, I believe they chose a similar sort of off-white shade than what's there now. I think sort of a beige shade now, so it'll be sort of a lighter color of that. So.
But the heritage permit's already been approved, right, for that work?
That's correct.
Okay, so then we'll go to members of the public. Comments or questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just a couple questions coming from the debate so far by the committee and information provided. So the processing of these grants is sort of a regular feature of this committee, and it's orderly and organized very well. But I'm wondering if there are grant applications that are brought to staff that get turned down before they come here for reasons other than, say, tax or owing or whatever, in terms of inadequate cause for the grant funding to be applied. Is that a reasonable question? And then my next question is sort of related to that. We have some where the repairs are going to cost, say, 10 grand, some, 20 grand, 30 grand, and so forth. And I'm wondering if staff ever looks at the percentage of the grant funding that would be applied. Like if you're looking at a project that's, say, 4 grand, then you could have half of it covered by a grant. If you have one that's going to be a lot more. So is that a criterion of how the grant funding is applied? So, and thanks to the director for providing an update on the amount of funding available for 2017. It seems that the program is of interest, it's growing and popular, so that's great to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Staff has an opportunity to respond.
I guess I can take that one too, Mr. Chair. So a couple of things for Mr. Dixon. The program as it's currently established allows a grant up to 50% of the cost of the eligible work, but limits that to a cap of $2,000 per application, and they can apply every other year. So that is something that we are considering as part of our review of this bylaw, but as it currently stands, that's how that works. The question about applications that don't make it to the committee, yes. We work with all applicants extensively before it gets before this group, both grants and permits and the like, to ensure that things that make it to this stage are ones that we feel we can support. So usually they don't get to the application stage. We will discuss their applications before they get to that point and work them through. If it's something that we feel is eligible or can meet the eligibility criteria, we would absolutely encourage them to use the program. But if certain alterations aren't, then certainly they don't get to the stage. So yes, there's a lot of background work that comes before we get to here. So, and I think
Mr. Newman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just wanted to add, and I think the Heritage Properties Working Group had the opportunity to look at a first draft of the revisions to the grant bylaw. But the city staff right now are undertaking an update to the bylaw, and we are contemplating a number of these questions about, is the grant dollar amount sufficient? Because it doesn't take a very substantial project to use up to $2,000 that we have eligible. And the other thing is we are having a public open house. We're in the process now of scheduling that we'll be advertising on the city's project webpage for August the 22nd at the Heritage Resource Center to engage more broadly on updates to the grant bylaw and how it's working. The criteria that we use to review applications, one of the things that we're thinking, maybe just to give a quick plug to some of the changes, is looking at receiving all the applications within a specific window and then using criteria to assess those applications at one time. Right now, the process is essentially the first in the door get reviewed against the eligibility criteria, and then if there's funding available 1 month after the other, and the works themselves are eligible, then we would issue the grants. So we're hoping that there's perhaps some criteria that we can use to evaluate the importance of the works themselves and the eligibility of the grant dollars. And again, $2,000 doesn't go very far, so perhaps there's an opportunity to look at a larger amount as part of an update to the grant bylaw. But I just want to give a plug, so August 22nd at the Heritage Resource Center, 4 to 6, and there'll be some information on our project webpage.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Just in regards to the question about things that don't make it to the committee, I can attest personally to one that I heard from a constituent of Sydenham about a possible application that the committee never, and to my knowledge, has never received. So I don't know what happened to it, but I know that someone was interested in something and knew about the grant program and still never applied. So I know that that happens as well. Okay, so now we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. This is, just to remind those watching, this is Roman numeral 4 of business item 7. Sorry, 8D. Sorry, who moved it? Oh, yeah, but it has to be moved first. Yeah, so moved by Jamie.
Can I ask just a follow-up question, a really quick one?
Well, you can do it during our comments too. You can ask more questions. Let's just get it on the floor. That's where we're at now in the agenda.
Can we deal with the recommendations separately because there are different issues for different properties?
Yeah, we can do them clause by clause, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, we need a mover and seconder for the first one, which is 194 King Street East. Moved by Don, seconded by Councillor Schell. So this is 2,000 for 194 King Street East. Any comments? No debate? Okay, we'll call the question. Your mic's on, by the way. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. The next one is 658 King Street West. Mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Catherine. Any debate? Yes, Jamie.
I suppose it's more of a question. Under the current eligibility criteria, is it reasonable to say no to a request or recommend a no based on the fact that it's a business and a for-profit business versus a private homeowner? Like, is that allowed within, or is that just something that's a bit gray, in the gray zone?
I can answer that as chair. You can oppose an application for whatever reason you choose. You're a member of the public, also a committee member. You can take whatever position you like. There's no rules against it. If you would like to turn down applications based on that criteria, that's up to you. You may find others in agreement, or you may not. Any other debate? I have a question for staff. You may or may not be able to answer. Is the beneficiary of the third application, 104 Bagot Street, the same as the second? Because I know that Frontenac Properties also rents 104 Bagot Street.
Mr. Chair, the company that owns 658 King West manages the property at 104 Bagot, but does not own it. The grant dollars go to the owner.
So perhaps they reminded the owners that they could apply for a grant, but they're not the same beneficiary. Yes, Councillor Schell.
I just realized that I should declare a conflict because now that I have power of attorney for my mother, Frontenac Property Management handles her condo. So I will declare a conflict and write it up. Thanks.
So we're deliberating on the second clause, which is Frontenac Property Management is the owner. So she's declared her conflict. So if you'd like to write that out, we'll just take a brief recess while she does that, and then you'll excuse you for this. And that does not affect quorum because conflict changes the total quorum number before you, so you can't lose quorum because of conflict. So we're having a short recess while Councillor Schell writes out her disclosure of pecuniary interest. So Councillor Shell is leaving the chamber on pecuniary interest, and then we will get back to, does she have to leave? Sorry, just clarifying if she, does Councillor Shell have to leave the room? Sorry, you have to actually leave the room according to the committee bylaw, sorry. Sorry, Commissioner Hurdle. Okay, we're back to, we've moved and seconded the second one. Okay, so yes, we need a mover and a second. So it's not on the floor yet. We need a mover and a seconder to put it on the floor. Moved by Jamie, seconded by Dawn. So far, we've had some questions on it, but we haven't had anyone speak to it. Would anyone wish to speak? I think I know Jamie's already raised one point. I asked a question about the third one. We know we're about to run out of money very soon. Don, would you take the chair? I'd like to comment.
Yes, you have the floor.
I'd just like to say that if for the reasons that mentioned by Jamie and following the money along, if we come in the position that we've run out of grant money, now in future years this may not happen if the grant program gets changed, but the time being, there may be an applicant, a private owner in Sydenham District or in Berryfield who has a property and some much needed work, and they will put it off because of the money running out. And on that, in that sense, you have to look for ways to save grant money. And in that lens, I am planning to oppose this grant application on the grounds that it is going to a for-profit company with many, many properties. And so it's a drop in the bucket for their bottom line, whereas it might be a deal breaker for a private owner and delaying some much needed work. Thank you for bringing it up. Thank you.
I return the chair.
Okay, so there's 5 of us. We need to vote on it unless anyone else wants to debate. Okay, then I'll call the question. All those in favor? And all those opposed? And that fails. And then, Councillor Shell, you may come back. She didn't call for that, did she? Okay, so this one, 104 Bagot Street, is a private owner, and that happens to use a property management company that coincidentally, different situation. So we need a mover and a seconder. Actually, we need questions first before we move it. Any questions on 104? I had the one that I already asked. Yeah. Question? Yes?
Yes. Just ask staff if they paid a site visit to the 104 Bagot Street to look at the windows in particular and the rebuilding of the doorway on the second floor.
Before you answer, do you make site visits for grant applications on occasion? Or is it only for the permit applications?
I'll take this one too, because I guess it was mine. Well, the grant application, Mr. Chair, is always tied to a permit application. So we go to the site for all of them. So yes, we did attend the site on this particular property. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, Catherine.
Just following on from the discussion about for-profit companies, we have situations where, we have rental properties and, some of them are quite extensive rental properties. So just in this case, I'm wondering, I'm talking about 104 Bagot, who is living in the house? Is it the property owner or is it a person who is renting space from the property owner?
I can answer that question because not only is it in my district, it's across the street from where I live now and next door to where I used to live. It is tenants who rent by the month.
So we're in a difficult situation here, I think, because we're talking about for-profits, and I voted not to approve that, the last one. Here we have a for-profit situation again. And, you know, I know in the past that we have, we actually have recommended, the question really hasn't been raised, but, you know, I mean, I don't quite go from there, but it seems to be a little bit problematic.
Okay, but right before, we haven't moved it yet, so if we're going to debate it, we should move it and second it. Are there any just questions to staff on this one? Oh, Mr. Newman.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, I want to take a minute just to clarify that. So we recognize the social importance of the equity of distribution of funds and making sure that people aren't making an extra bit of profit at the cost of the taxpayer. But the purpose of the grant dollars themselves are to make sure that the heritage assets that we've identified as a municipality and designated for long-term conservation are being provided access to the funds that will ensure their long-term conservation. So recognizing that those funds may be received as profit for the landowner, it also might be the necessary carrot to seeing these resources maintained over the long term. So I wish I had perhaps said that before you made the vote. I don't know if it would have made a difference on the last file, but we see applications for grant dollars to support the long-term conservation of the resources, to support works that might not otherwise be undertaken by the owner.
Thank you. Now, questions only, or I'm going to insist that we move it and second it before we debate any further. Any questions? Okay. We need a mover and a seconder. Okay, moved by Catherine, seconded by Jamie. So now we're debating whether we approve the 2,000 for this 104 Bagot. Who would like to speak? Yes, Dawn.
Yes, I have a serious concern here, and I think the committee will recall previously when we've discussed grant applications that I've been concerned that alterations have already been approved under delegated authority when they're really not minor. And my own view is that the replacement of windows on a main facade is never a minor alteration. And this committee should participate in the sort of consideration of the application. Now, I won't go into actually this. I may raise this point under other business, but that general point. But for this specific property, as far as I can tell from from the street, essentially, these windows that are proposed to be replaced are original windows. And as far as I can tell, they're in good condition. So it's just incredible to me that they have been approved to be replaced totally contrary to the windows policy, without reference to this committee. And now the committee is being asked to approve a grant to facilitate the replacement of original fabric with a modern window. I mean, I think this is a very serious failure in our procedures, and certainly I'll be voting against this particular recommendation.
Thank you, Don. Anyone else debate on this item? Peter.
Thank you. The Windows policy, which I refreshed myself on last night, doesn't even limit itself to whether the windows are original or not. If they have historical, they may be replacement windows, but they may have historical character. And I can't support this because I think what has been allowed is, to put it mildly, a kind of second-class substitute, and I think we shouldn't be encouraging it.
Thank you, Peter. Any other comments or debate? Sorry, I was going to take a turn, Don, if you want to take the chair, and then we'll go to second round.
You have the floor, sorry.
Yes. So as Sydenham District Councillor, I speak now, very familiar with this area. And not having any, it's not in the report, but not having any indication otherwise, knowing the reasons that people sometimes replace windows is to put a modern window that may be more energy efficient. Again, that would be savings to their bottom line. To me, there is very little heritage justification for this particular grant, this particular one at 104 Bagot, not because it is a rental landlord who benefits, but because the reason for the replacement is not a heritage one, and that's why I'm going to oppose it.
Thank you. You have the floor, and may I make another comment?
Go ahead.
Just a suggestion that if staff are discussing this with the applicant, I'd be happy to support a grant application if they will repair and renovate the existing windows. So you can go back to them with that offer.
So staff, take note. If we do not approve this particular grant application, you can relay the Vice Chair's comments that if it was for repair rather than replace, that we might be willing to support. Okay, seeing no more hands, I'll call the question on this application, 104 Bagot Street. All those in favor? Opposed? And that fails. Next is 191 King Street East. Questions only. Seeing none, mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by Peter, seconded by Jamie. Would anyone like to speak to it? Yes, Don.
A couple of comments. I certainly don't have a problem with this application, but I'm a little bit concerned about, again, that the committee doesn't hear about the application until it's been the alteration. The Cartwright House is probably the most important residence, heritage residence in Kingston. And I think any change should be looked at very carefully. And so, I just feel a little disappointed that we're not brought into the discussion. In particular, the colors are being changed. And I can't tell whether the new colors are going to be good or better or worse. But again, I think on such an important building, we should see samples. We should know a bit more than what we're given here. And finally, I noticed reading through the paint contractor's quotation that the quotation just refers to painting the fronts of the shutters. So the backs of the shutters are not going to be painted. Now, the point of painting is not just for appearance, it's for protection. And if the backs of the shutters are allowed to lose their paint, they're going to deteriorate. So I think it's just poor practice to approve an application to paint just the front of the shutters. Maybe the backs are already well painted, and it's just a matter of color. But this is
sorry, Don. Just to remind you, it's only the grant that we can consider, not the application itself.
You're right. I get the point. Well, I think committee has to decide whether they should approve grant application or not. But as I say, I'm concerned with what's going to be done in the way of painting. I don't think it's quite up to standard for this building.
Okay. Any other? Let's move in a second already, right? Any other debate? Seeing none, I'll call the question on this application. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. Working group reports. We do have two reports. They're pages 161 to 165, near the end, actually the last 5 pages of the package. So you'll see the Heritage Properties Working Group briefing notes. We need a mover and a seconder to receive them. Moved by Catherine, seconded by, sorry, I know there's only Don, 5 of you here, you're both moving and seconding lots of things. So that's the Heritage Properties Working Group briefing notes to receive. All those in favor? And that carries. You noticed the next one is Cultural Heritage Working Group agenda notes with, this is a large group, had more members present at this working group than we do today at Heritage. This was at their last meeting in June. We need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Jamie. All those in favor? And that carries. So that's all the business. There are no motions. Under other business, we have the item entitled Current State of Affairs of the Heritage Committee. This is other business. We could theoretically get into a long discussion here, but because Dawn brought it up a couple of times about the procedures, we can make comments, but there's really no opportunity to solve anything under other business. So we can't make any decisions under other business, but we can certainly have a brief discussion about the way things are working. Go ahead, Don.
Yes, well, I think it's time that the committee recognizes that the committee has problems, and the question is, how do we address those problems? There's problems with the composition of the committee and problems with the heritage procedures. I don't think either of these are satisfactory. This committee has been operating for a year now, and I think when it was set up, I think many of us remember that it was established really against the wishes of members of the previous Heritage Committee and the previous Museums Committee. We pointed out that there were significant problems in the way it could work, and I think those issues are obvious to us now. One of the, as far as the structure is concerned, the most basic problem is that we have a kind of group of people, of members who have some expertise in built heritage, and others whose expertise is in museums and general heritage. And but the reality is that almost all of the business that comes here is about built heritage. And obviously this is not, I should say that I think it's an excellent committee, a lot of good people on it, but for people who are not interested in architecture and built heritage, they can't find these meetings very rewarding. I think they can't participate. They can't participate in the DASH procedures, or at least they don't. It's essentially a waste of time. Then for those of us who are in the sort of built heritage area, what we found is that we're not allowed to function in any effective way. We can't ask questions of applicants under the new procedures. We find that many alteration permits are being approved without our knowledge, without our input, and often when we think we should be having input. So essentially, many of my colleagues in that area are perceiving the committee to be a waste of time. They are serving on this committee because they want to help the owners of heritage properties, give them advice, give them input, and help them find solutions, but they're not able to do that. And so I think to a greater extent, they're not going to bother coming. So we're having quorum issues and attendance issues. So, I think we were told when this committee was set up that if we don't like it, we can have a review and come up with something better. Well, I think the time is come to have a review, and I hope to get some input. Hope the other members will make some input here. But my thought is that at the next committee meeting, to bring in a motion asking City Council to approve a review of the committee and possible restructuring. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And yes, that on your last point, the decision does rest with council, just as the decision to set up the committee in its current form came from council. So it would be it would be the city councillors and the mayor that would decide whether or not to have a review or any kind of restructuring that might happen. So that's just to not lose sight of that. Anyone else wish to comment on this item? Jamie, and then Peter.
Actually, I'd just like to broadly echo what Don says. I'm new to the committee, and I dare say I'm probably the youngest on the committee. I joined because reading the advert for the new composition of the committee, it was to be 50% cultural and museum and then build heritage. And I applied as a museum practitioner, as someone who's doing my PhD on cultural studies, and that's my professional expertise. And while I find it's been edifying being on this committee, it is essentially all built heritage, as is, I can see the reason for that. There's a lot of details and a lot of work to be done. I also find it interesting that probably in retrospect, I would have preferred to have been on a working group, right? But that wasn't sort of a clear thing, and I think that is problematic. On the other side, I think we're getting into a bit of a danger zone because it is a volunteer activity. And while I think DASH is great, I think it's effective, it increases the amount of work. And when I'm unable to participate in DASH, it's just literally because I have other deadlines in my life, particularly as a PhD student. And they do tend to drop just out of the blue. Sometimes there's a few, sometimes there's a lot, and it's repeated again in the meeting. So in terms of the time investment, I think that's starting to get problematic because it's shifting it from what could be a volunteer position into what could be arguably work. And in terms of accessibility, in terms of participation, I think, speaking as a young person who works a precarious work schedule and is a student and a relatively low income, it's pushing access to participate in processes like this to either people who have time, either because they're retired or they're fairly affluent and don't have to worry about the day-to-day. It's not necessarily an easy fix, but I think it's something to consider to widen participation.
Thank you. Just on your point about DASH, just to remind the committee that the concept was, rightly or wrongly, but the concept at the time was to have input earlier on in the process that would go, sometimes as you see in the reports, goes back to the applicant changes slightly some things. That the purpose of having the DASH, the timing of the intervention by DASH is to weigh in sooner than basically the last second, which is whether we approve or not, which is at the committee meeting. So yes, it is an extra time commitment, but that was the rationale for it, and we do need to evaluate whether it's working. I guess, okay, just go further to what Don was saying. We were promised a review roughly a year after the committee started, and what we had was my report at the last meeting, which I worked on with James, which is more of a sort of a statistics of what the work of the committee is. But that's an annual thing that happens every year. We haven't had a review of the functioning of the committee, sort of like probationary period has ended and we're reviewing how it's working. We haven't had that. So, but that would have to be mandated by council. So that's the procedural part of it. I'm open to all suggestions. I'd like to say regarding the composition, regardless of where your background was, and speaking as someone who does not have a specialization in either cultural studies or heritage or built heritage or architecture, I have neither of those things. I just have a general arts education. I'm interested in both sides. I know, Peter, you have expertise on both sides. So it is not always cut and dried about sort of being this type of member, that type of member. The members that are here are and do come and do participate are very valuable to me as chair, regardless of your background. I would just say that since this committee started a year ago, it has never been the individuals who were chosen by the nominations committee that are to blame for the problems with the committee. It is the getting our heads around an efficient way of doing business that is the problem. Yes, Councillor Schell.
Thanks. Yes, you made some really good points. And especially the last one, an efficient way of doing the business while feeling that it's being done thoroughly. And that seems to be part of the bone of contention. And it's also how we do it thoroughly. And it is a committee that has a legislative side. I mean, it's a mandated committee by the province that we maybe should go over again what the legislative portion is. There is a legal side to this committee. And there's also sort of past practice that still keeps coming forward, but we have, as a council, delegated a lot of authority to staff. And we have, as a city, hired professional heritage staff. And it still partly harkens to the days when we didn't have that. So we depended on people who had done heritage restoration for advice that we could then, hand over. And we have been trying to change it so that people come to the professional staff for the discussion and staff use their delegated authority. So there seems to be still a big push-pull on that one that may change over time, I hope, because we do want to be able to do the business of heritage, which has expanded. When I say to people, 8 years ago, we didn't have cultural heritage or culture or museums as sort of part of the city, integrated into city functions. We just simply didn't have those staff. We just didn't have staff. And we've been building that whole capacity in the city. So there is a change going on, and I think we will probably have these discussions for a while longer. But we do have added responsibilities now, and somehow we have to deal with them along with the new responsibilities that we have as a whole committee. But I do suspect we need to discuss the legislative side again, what this committee is permitted to do and not permitted to do in terms of when somebody makes a heritage application, what that means in terms of the law of the province. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Yes, Peter.
Thank you. I want, I think, to speak to 2 points. And the first is, I think, the point that Jamie raised. If this committee is going to serve the city effectively, this committee needs to have on it people who are not specialists in the built environment, and having a variety of perspectives around it, of people who are interested but who are not degreed and who do not regard themselves as specialists in it. That's very important, because that is the way that the city That is, the citizens of the city are represented on this committee, and that is what this committee is supposed to be. We are supposed to be, those of us who are appointed to it, people who are capable of representing the taxpayers, the residents of the city. And I know before I came on this committee, there was an architect on it, and there were a number of specialists on it with very clear expertise, and that was, I think that they performed, I'm told that they performed in a different relationship to the applicants than is the case now. And yes, there is some value in having a specialist on it. We don't want to have just all the general public, but if this is only going to be a conversation among specialists, it is not going to be, I think, very readily attractive to the public. And one of the great responsibilities of city government, and this committee is part of it, I think, is to educate the public to whom we are ultimately responsible, councillors, people like ourselves, and we want to do that as effectively as we can. And we can't do that effectively if we are regarded by the public and if we are simply a kind of a small cadre of specialists. So we desperately need the generalists and interested citizens on it. The second thing I want to say is that in my own experience, the last year has been very much less attractive as a member of this committee. And I think for a couple of reasons. The first of which is that I have got an awful lot less education by coming to these meetings in the last year than I had before. And I think the primary reason for that is that under the current set of legislative arrangements, we are denied the capacity as members of the public to discuss the business of the public, which we are here to discuss. That business has basically, as far as we are concerned, been transformed into a series of kind of private emails which we send by dash. And we can read what other people say. Don gets his reports in many more than I do, but when I'm writing a report, and if Don's is there, I read it because he makes me think. But that is not the same as being able to have a public discussion around this table of the issues. And I think that that has meant for me, it's meant two things that are very important and which take away, I think, the capacity of this committee to speak to the public. First of all, it privatizes it as private communications with the staff. Secondly, we are then denied the kind of educative forum which this should be for ourselves as well as the public by failing to have a capacity to discuss it in public. And I mean, quite frankly, if this doesn't change, I'm not going to continue on this committee. And I make that statement with a certain amount of sadness. But I think there's an opportunity here, and if that opportunity can be reclaimed, I think it will be very valuable. If it doesn't, I think it will continue to be unsatisfactory for me and perhaps for other people as well.
Thank you. Catherine, did you have anything to say? No? Okay. I just thought of another aspect that we haven't mentioned yet, and because I've mentioned it before, I'm going to mention it again. I mentioned this to staff, and this is in no way this is not being critical of anything that staff has done, or in particular the Cultural Heritage Department. But it's evident after receiving 14 briefings last year from the Cultural Heritage Department, and last meeting we were given the opportunity to weigh in on what they were doing, but there was very little uptake at the time. Just an objective third party who was observing would say that clearly that is not a big part of our current business, and which would support all the comments saying that mostly what we do regards built heritage. That's the actuality of the time that we spend here at the committee. However, I still hold out hope that we could generate some business regarding cultural heritage, things where someone with only built heritage expertise might feel like they're learning something and might feel like they're, on the outside looking in. That hasn't happened yet. And I don't know if it's because those discussions are happening amongst professional staff members who have such a high level of expertise that they don't feel like our input is valuable, or if it's because the work is mostly very carefully done and not presented to us until it's mostly already finished. But there's, if more actual deliberation by committee members, which, as Peter says, are members of the public, if that is not forthcoming, I see no reason to have it as a part of the committee. I've been asking for this for some time now, and it's not for lack of trying. Last month, the cultural department came to us and asked for our input, but it wasn't successful. So I don't know if we need more shots, more kicks at the can, or what. But if an objective person can't say that this committee is dealing with both our non-built heritage, cultural heritage issues, which is museums and everything else, and the stories of Kingston and all that stuff, if it's not dealing with that, we need to ask council whether it should be included in the first place, because that was the change that was made a year ago. And and not because I don't want it, because I do want it. I am interested in the stories and the cultural heritage side, very interested. I'm just as interested in that side as the architectural side. It just hasn't happened. It hasn't happened yet. And it needs to happen. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. I don't think this is on purpose. Just hasn't happened. So we have to think about that as well, because if there's still work to be done in that regard before we pronounce judgment, then maybe now is not the time for review. Thank you. Okay, so does anyone else want to take a second shot? Don, do you have anything else to say?
Well, just a comment that I do appreciate the comments I've heard, and I think in particular Peter Goheen raised some good points, and I entirely agree that this should not be just a committee of built heritage specialists. It never has been in the past, but the business has almost always been built heritage, but we need people from the community who are not specialists, but who care about where Kingston is going and what should be done, what needs to be done, what priorities should be done. So we've always had those people on the committee, and that's been very important. And I hope that continues. But as long as the business of built heritage is as extensive as it is, it's really not realistic to say one committee can handle built heritage, museums, and general things. I mean, most of us are interested in all these things, but it doesn't mean they can all be done efficiently and effectively in the present format.
Jamie, I saw your hand.
It's just sort of a quick final point for me on, I've heard the word efficiency sort of used a lot, and I suppose I'm speaking to our two political members here more, and efficiency, particularly in the public sector, is just as driven by ideology or the idea of efficiency or ideas around it as it is by pragmatics, right? What actually is efficient. And on paper, I know it can seem very efficient to block a lot of material into one meeting or to make these mega groups in terms of purpose and responsibility, but in practicality, it often isn't. Just even today, because we had no briefings about culture, it was a far more efficient meeting because it effectively was just only on built heritage issues. And just, a final humorous note, I do remember at the beginning of the session, I remember you saying, Peter, that we couldn't go past 12 o'clock noon in these meetings because otherwise the city would have to provide us lunch. And I can think of several meetings that have gone past noon and no lunch has been procured. So, citing budgetary reasons. So they're, just a final point to consider.
Thanks for reminding me that we might have to have a bathroom break soon. Councillor Schell.
I've got 16 minutes. No, I'll just, again, life has changed so much just in the time I've been a councillor. During the Cultural Heritage Working Group, no, I'll go back to the North Kingstown Secondary Plan visioning, and out of that visioning came a request, if not demand, from the neighborhood who are terribly keen on their built heritage and their cultural heritage and their landscape. And we just talked about, we hardly ever talk about landscaping here. The world has so much expanded in the last few years. So the there's going to be a cultural heritage landscapes study done for the North Kingstown as a result of the North Kingstown visioning, and we've never done one. It's brand new to the city of Kingston. It's brand new to most cities, actually, even ones that have had, heritage committees for years and years. The idea that we've had these districts, heritage districts, because we have a pool of very beautiful homes, generally, that should be lumped together under massive protection. But we've never protected, well, for me, Portsmouth District would be a prime example of a cultural heritage landscape that should be preserved because it was the workers' cottages and modest homes for the psych hospital in the pen. But the more that becomes visible and important to people, and the more people realize it's on the water, the more pressure there is to rip down the houses and put big houses there because it's a really prime spot. And I think Berryfield must have gone through this, save the workers' cottages. But the view is $1 million view, so there was huge pressure to turn it into a millionaire's row because of the location and the views. So we are just now, in the last few months, trying to tackle another huge issue that we've never tackled before as a city, cultural heritage landscape study. And I think staff are having a little trouble. Does it go to planning? What do we do legislatively? Talk about zoning bylaws and official plan reviews. Does it come here? Because this is where we would discuss heritage cultural landscapes. Or where does it go? So it's here in a working group, but it's going to be with staff. It is with staff for a formal study that they have to figure out how to do. And I think they'd like advice. Where is it going to come from? And we don't, as this committee, know. So we do have questions that we're trying to figure out how to do it. And I don't have the answer. And I think we could probably discuss this for a few hours or days, the whole idea of cultural landscape studies. So I'm efficient in terms of that we get to everything, not in terms of, push it through. But anyway, it's just something that has come up and is becoming vitally important. And as a city, we're going to need help to figure out how to do it. Thanks.
Thank you. Did I see any other hands? Well, I guess it'll be to be continued. Thank you, Don, for bringing that up. We'll move on to the last item, which is our next meeting. We do have a meeting in August. We may have quorum issues again. We finished the meeting today with minimum quorum. Had anyone gone to the bathroom, we would have had to suspend operations. So thank you for holding your bladders. We should put that in the application. Heritage members must have strong bladders. Yes, Peter.
This is a bit of humor which is a little more potty than the humor we've had before, but I went a couple of years ago through Penrhyn Castle in northern Wales. It was a place built by the people who made too much money on the slate, which put every church roof, and most workers' cottages in Britain made them dry. The place is marvelous. It's Victorian, but and the king, or at least the man who became Edward VII, was a visitor on a number of occasions. The dining room was very wonderful. The bathrooms were not very good, and so there was a cupboard in what would have been a sideboard, and it had a potty, and there was also a screen. And so His Royal Highness and other guests, when they really had to, having eaten too much, they actually just relieved themselves in the chamber.
And with that, I am going to ask for a motion to adjourn. Thank you. All those in favor? And this meeting is adjourned. See you next month.